Karen lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone knew each other, or at least thought they did. The streets were lined with neatly trimmed lawns, kids rode their bicycles on sunny afternoons, and neighbors exchanged pleasantries over white picket fences. Karen had always considered herself the watchdog of her street. She prided herself on keeping an eye out for anything unusual, believing it was her duty to protect her community. Whether it was reporting a broken streetlight or confronting someone walking too close to private property, Karen wasn't shy about speaking up. One bright afternoon, Karen was returning home from her weekly grocery trip. Her car was packed with bags of fresh produce, snacks for her kids, and a new scented candle she'd picked up on impulse. As she turned onto her street, something caught her attention. A white van parked near the curb just a few houses down from hers. At first glance, there was nothing particularly alarming about it. It looked like any ordinary delivery van, but something felt off to Karen. For starters, it didn't have any company logos or markings on its sides. Most delivery vans proudly displayed their brand names, but this one was completely blank. Karen slowed her car as she approached the van, narrowing her eyes suspiciously. She noticed that the engine was still running, and the driver, a man in his mid-30s wearing a plain gray t-shirt, was standing outside, talking to someone inside. What really made her heart race, though, was what she saw next. A group of children, some holding hands while others walked slowly with assistance, began boarding the van one by one. They seemed different somehow, not just because they were young, but because they appeared to have special needs. Some used walkers, others wore hearing aids, and a few looked like they needed extra help getting into the vehicle. Karen's mind immediately went into overdrive. What is going on here, she thought. Her imagination started spinning wild theories. Was this some kind of secret operation? Could these children be in danger? Maybe the man was part of a human trafficking ring, preying on vulnerable kids. Or, worse, what if he planned to take them somewhere unsafe? The more Karen thought about it, the angrier she became. How could anyone do such a thing in broad daylight right under everyone's noses? Without wasting another second, Karen pulled her car over to the side of the road, grabbed her phone, and stepped out. She marched straight toward the van, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Her face was set in a determined scowl, and her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. By now, the driver, whose name was Marcus, had noticed her approach. He raised an eyebrow, clearly confused by her sudden appearance. "Excuse me," Karen called out loudly, making sure everyone within earshot could hear her. "What exactly are you doing here?" Marcus blinked, taken aback by her aggressive tone. He glanced around briefly before answering, "I'm just picking up some kids. We're heading to a day program." "A day program?" Karen repeated incredulously. "You expect me to believe that? Who are you? Where's your ID? Show me proof that you're allowed to take these kids." Marcus sighed, trying to remain calm despite Karen's rising hostility. "Ma'am, I work for a non-profit organization. We provide transportation services for children with disabilities. Everything we do is legal and approved." But Karen wasn't buying it. She crossed her arms over her chest and shook her head firmly. "That's not good enough," she snapped. "I don't know you, and I don't trust you. These kids deserve better than being shoved into some random van without proper identification." By now, a small crowd had begun to gather. Neighbors peeked out of their windows or stepped outside to see what all the commotion was about. Some stood silently, watching the scene unfold, while others whispered among themselves. One elderly woman even pulled out her phone to record the confrontation. Karen didn't care. In fact, she welcomed the attention. If this guy was up to no good, she wanted everyone to witness it. "You need to leave right now," Karen demanded, pointing a finger at Marcus. "If you don't, I'm calling the police." Marcus frowned, frustration creeping into his voice. "Look, ma'am, I can't just leave. These kids are counting on me to get them where they need to go. If you have concerns, feel free to call. Whoever you want, but I'm not leaving until my job is done." Karen huffed, clearly annoyed by his refusal to back down. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, dialing 911 with exaggerated movements. "Fine," she said, glaring at him. "Let's see how confident you are when the cops show up." As Karen waited for the dispatcher to answer, Marcus tried once more to explain the situation. "This is a legitimate service," he said, gesturing toward the van. "These families rely on us every day. Please just let me do my job." But Karen wasn't listening anymore. In her mind, she was already envisioning herself as the hero of the story, the brave neighbor who stopped a potential criminal in their tracks. Little did she know her actions were about to spiral into something far bigger and far more complicated than she could have ever imagined. Karen's phone call to the police felt like an eternity, though in reality it only took a few minutes. Her voice was firm and clipped as she explained the situation to the dispatcher, painting Marcus as a suspicious character who refused to leave her neighborhood despite her demands. She made sure to emphasize the unmarked van and the presence of children, hoping that would speed up the response time. Once the call ended, she slipped her phone back into her purse and turned her attention back to Marcus. "You're not going anywhere until the police get here," Karen declared, planting herself squarely in front of the van. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, and her jaw was set in a stubborn line. To anyone watching, it was clear she wasn't backing down anytime soon. Marcus, on the other hand, looked increasingly exasperated. He glanced at his watch, then back at the group of children waiting patiently near the van. Some of them were sitting quietly on the curb, while others leaned against their walkers or chatted softly with one another. They seemed unfazed by the drama unfolding around them, but Marcus knew better. Every minute wasted here meant they'd arrive late to their destination, a community center where they spent their afternoons learning, playing, and socializing. For many of these kids, this program was a lifeline, offering structure and support their families couldn't always provide. "Ma'am, I understand you're concerned," Marcus said, trying to sound as calm and reasonable as possible. "But delaying us isn't helping anyone. These kids need to get to their program on time," Karen scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Oh, please, don't try to guilt-trip me. If you were really doing something legitimate, you wouldn't have a problem proving it. But instead, you're standing here refusing to cooperate." Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. He had dealt with difficult people before, but Karen's level of hostility was something else entirely. Still, he decided to give it one more shot. "Look, I already told you I work for a nonprofit organization. We transport children with disabilities to various programs throughout the week. You can verify everything I'm saying if you'd just let me show you the paperwork." But Karen wasn't interested in hearing any more excuses. She shook her head firmly, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't care what you say. Until the police arrive, you're not moving this van." At this point, the crowd of onlookers had grown larger. Neighbors continued to trickle out of their homes, drawn by the commotion. Some stood silently, observing the scene with curious expressions, while others openly voiced their opinions. A middle-aged man wearing a baseball cap muttered under his breath, "She's probably right to be cautious. You can never be too careful these days." His wife nodded in agreement, clutching her purse tightly. On the other side of the street, however, a younger couple exchanged skeptical glances. The woman whispered to her partner, "Do you think she's overreacting? That guy looks harmless enough." Her husband shrugged, unsure of what to make of the situation. Meanwhile, a teenager filming the entire thing on his phone grinned mischievously. "This is gold," he said to his friend. "It's like a real-life drama unfolding right in front of us." The growing audience only fueled Karen's determination. She basked in the attention, convinced that she was doing the right thing. In her mind, she was protecting her neighborhood from potential danger. What she failed to consider, though, was how her actions might affect the very people she claimed to care about: the children. As the standoff dragged on, Marcus grew increasingly anxious. He glanced at the kids again, noticing the way some of them fidgeted uncomfortably or looked around in confusion. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Normally, his pickups were quick and efficient, allowing the children to settle into the van without unnecessary stress. Today, however, Karen's interference had turned a routine task into a chaotic spectacle. Realizing he needed backup, Marcus pulled out his own phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. After a few rings, a familiar voice answered. "Hey, Marcus, what's up?" "Derek, I've got a situation," Marcus said, keeping his tone low so Karen wouldn't overhear. "There's this woman. She thinks I'm up to no good because of the van. She called the police and won't let me leave. I tried explaining everything, but she's not listening." Derek chuckled lightly, assuming it was just a minor misunderstanding. "Sounds rough, man. Do you need me to swing by and talk to her?" "Yes, please," Marcus replied, relief washing over him. "If anyone can straighten this out, it's you." Derek hesitated for a moment, considering the request. As a SWAT officer, he was used to handling high-stakes situations, but this was definitely outside the norm. Still, Marcus was his best friend, and he trusted him completely. "All right, I'll be there in 10 minutes, Derek said finally. "Just hang tight until then." Back at the scene, Karen remained resolute, pacing back and forth in front of the van like a sentry guarding a fortress. Occasionally, she shot Marcus a glare, daring him to attempt anything. When a distant siren wailed in the distance, her face lit up with triumph. "Finally," she muttered under her breath. "Now we'll see who's telling the truth." Unbeknownst to her, Derek was already en route, preparing to step into a situation that would quickly escalate beyond anyone's expectations. By the time the first police cruiser arrived, the stage was set for a confrontation that would leave everyone involved questioning their assumptions, and perhaps even themselves. The sound of sirens grew louder as 2 police cruisers turned onto the street, their flashing blue and red lights casting an eerie glow over the quiet suburban neighborhood. Karen's heart raced with a mix of excitement and vindication. She had been right all along, or so she thought. Finally, the authorities were here to sort things out and confirm her suspicions. As the officers stepped out of their cars, adjusting their hats and surveying the scene, Karen straightened her posture, ready to present her case. But just as the first officer approached, a third vehicle pulled up behind the cruisers, a black SUV with tinted windows. The door opened and out stepped Derek, dressed in full tactical gear. His presence immediately commanded attention. Clad in a bulletproof vest, utility belt, and boots, he exuded authority. A patch on his shoulder identified him as part of the SWAT team, and the badge clipped to his chest added an air of legitimacy that silenced the murmurs of the crowd. Karen froze, her confidence faltering for the first time. Who was this man? And why did he look like he belonged in an action movie? Her mind scrambled to process the sudden shift in dynamics. Marcus, however, visibly relaxed, letting out a small sigh of relief. He walked over to Derek and greeted him, with a quick nod, exchanging a few hushed words before turning back to face Karen. One of the uniformed officers stepped forward, addressing Karen directly. "Ma'am, can you tell us what's going on here?" Karen cleared her throat, regaining some of her composure. She gestured dramatically toward the van and Marcus. "This man is refusing to leave my neighborhood despite my repeated requests. He claims he's transporting children to some kind of program, but there's no proof, no company logo, no paperwork, nothing. I think it's suspicious and I want answers." The officer nodded, jotting down notes on his pad. Then he turned to Marcus, who stood calmly beside Derek. "Sir, can you explain your side of the story?" Marcus took a deep breath, speaking in a measured tone. "I work for a non-profit organization that provides transportation services for children with special needs. These kids rely on us to get them to and from programs during the week. Everything we do is legal, and I have documentation to prove it." Before Karen could interject, Derek stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Officer, if I may, I'm a SWAT officer, and this is my friend Marcus. He called me earlier because of the situation unfolding here. I assure you, everything he's saying is true. This is a legitimate service, and these families depend on it." Karen's eyes widened as she processed Derek's words. A SWAT officer, supporting Marcus? Surely this had to be some kind of misunderstanding, or worse, a setup. She shook her head vigorously, stepping closer to the group. "That doesn't mean anything. Just because he knows someone in law enforcement doesn't make him innocent. How do we know they're not working together? This could all be a cover." Her accusation caused a ripple of murmurs among the onlookers. Some nodded in agreement, clearly still unsure of whom to believe, while others exchanged skeptical glances. One neighbor whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Come on, Karen. Don't you think you're jumping to conclusions? Another chimed in. Yeah, maybe you should let them show you the proof instead of assuming the worst. Derek raised a hand, signaling for calm. Ma'am, he said, addressing Karen directly. I understand your concerns, but obstructing lawful activities isn't the answer. If you'd like, I can personally verify Marcus's credentials and the legitimacy of this operation. Would that help ease your worries? Karen hesitated, caught off guard by Derek's composed demeanor. There was something about his tone, calm yet authoritative, that made her doubt herself for a split second. But pride quickly pushed those doubts aside. She squared her shoulders, refusing to back down. Fine, she snapped. Show me the proof. Let's see if it checks out. Marcus reached into the glove compartment of the van and pulled out a folder containing documents related to the nonprofit organization. He handed them to Derek, who skimmed through them briefly before passing them along to the officers. The papers included official permits, insurance information, and letters of authorization from the families whose children used the service. It was more than enough to validate Marcus's claims. One of the officers reviewed the documents carefully, nodding as he flipped through the pages. This all looks legitimate, he said finally, looking up at Karen. There doesn't appear to be any wrongdoing here. Karen's face flushed with embarrassment, though she tried to mask it with indignation. Well, how was I supposed to know that? She retorted defensively. Anyone could claim they're doing something good. What if this was all fake? Someone has to keep an eye out for the community. Derek crossed his arms over his chest, his expression softening slightly. It's understandable to want to protect your neighborhood, he acknowledged. But sometimes assumptions can lead to unnecessary conflicts. Instead of confronting people directly, it's always better to ask questions or seek clarification. First, Karen opened her mouth to argue further, but the words caught in her throat. For the first time since the confrontation began, she realized how far she had taken things. Blocking the van, calling the police, accusing Marcus of illegal activity. It all seemed so extreme now that the truth was laid bare. Yet admitting fault wasn't something Karen was accustomed to, and she struggled to find the right response. Meanwhile, the children waiting near the van began to grow restless. Some of them looked visibly uncomfortable, shifting awkwardly in their seats or whispering to one another. A young girl with braces and a bright pink backpack tugged gently on Marcus's sleeve. Are we going soon? She asked softly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Marcus knelt down to her level, smiling reassuringly. Yes, sweetheart. We'll leave very soon. Just a little longer, okay? He stood up and turned back to Derek, who gave him an encouraging nod. Let's wrap this up, Derek suggested. These kids have places to be. The officers agreed, instructing Karen to step aside and allow Marcus to continue his route. Reluctantly, Karen moved out of the way, muttering under her breath about how no one appreciated her efforts to keep the community safe. As the van's engine roared back to life and Marcus climbed into the driver's seat, Derek lingered behind, watching Karen closely. You might want to reflect on this, he said quietly, his tone neither accusatory nor judgmental. Not every problem requires drastic measures. Sometimes a simple conversation can resolve things without causing harm or disruption. With that, Derek returned to his SUV, leaving Karen standing alone amidst the dispersing crowd. Neighbors drifted back to their homes, shaking their heads, or sharing quiet comments about the incident. Karen watched as the van drove away, its taillights disappearing around the corner. Though the immediate crisis had passed, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something deeper within her needed to change, and that realization weighed heavily on her shoulders. As the dust settled and the crowd dispersed, Karen stood frozen in place, her mind racing with conflicting emotions. The van was gone, the officers had departed, and Derek's parting words lingered in her ears like an echo she couldn't escape. For a moment there was silence, just the sound of distant birds chirping and the faint hum of cars passing on nearby streets. But inside Karen's head, it was chaos. She replayed the entire confrontation over and over again, each memory stabbing at her pride like tiny daggers. At first, she tried to convince herself that she'd done nothing wrong. After all, wasn't it her duty to protect her neighborhood? If someone suspicious showed up unannounced, shouldn't she question them? Wasn't vigilance a good thing? These thoughts swirled around in her mind, offering temporary comfort. Yet deep down, a small voice whispered something else. A truth she didn't want to face. Had she acted too hastily? Too harshly? Her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her internal debate. Pulling it out, she saw notifications pouring in. Texts from neighbors, missed calls from friends, and dozens of alerts about social media mentions. Curious, she opened one of the apps and froze. Videos of the incident had already gone viral. Someone had filmed the entire confrontation and uploaded it online, complete with captions like "Suburban Drama Unfolds" and "Karen versus Special Needs Van Driver." Comments flooded the post, ranging from support for Karen's actions to outright condemnation. One user wrote, "This woman is a hero for standing up against potential danger." Another shot back, "Hero? More like a bully who caused unnecessary panic. Those kids just wanted to go to their program in peace." The thread devolved into arguments with people passionately defending their sides. Some praised Karen for being proactive, while others criticized her lack of empathy and understanding. Reading through the comments felt like being caught in a storm of judgment, each word hitting harder than the last. Feeling overwhelmed, Karen scrolled further and came across interviews with parents whose children relied on the nonprofit services. One mother tearfully recounted how crucial the transportation program was for her son, who used a wheelchair and needed specialized care. "We trust these drivers with our children's safety," she said in the video. "To see someone accuse them of wrongdoing, it breaks my heart." Another father chimed in, his frustration evident. "People need to stop jumping to conclusions. Not everything is a threat. Sometimes it's just a person doing their job and trying to help others." His words stung, piercing through Karen's defenses. She closed the app abruptly, her hands trembling as guilt began to creep in. Later that evening, Karen sat alone, in her living room staring blankly at the wall. Her husband, Mark, walked in after a long day at work, sensing immediately that something was off. He set his briefcase down and looked at her curiously. "What's going on?" he asked gently. "You've been quiet all evening." Karen hesitated, unsure where to begin. How could she explain what had happened without sounding defensive or foolish? Finally, she sighed and told him everything. The van, the argument, the police, Derek, and the aftermath. As she spoke, tears welled up in her eyes, though she fought, hard to hold them back. Mark listened patiently, his expression unreadable until she finished. "Karen," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "I get why you felt the need to step in. You've always cared about keeping our neighborhood safe. But maybe this time you let your suspicions cloud your judgment. Did you ever stop to think about how your actions might affect those kids?" His question hit her like a punch to the gut. No, she hadn't thought about them. Not really. In her rush to play the role of protector, she'd overlooked the very people she claimed to be safeguarding. The realization made her feel smaller than she ever had before. The next morning, Karen woke up to find news crews parked outside her house. Reporters knocked on her door, microphones in hand, eager to get her side of the story. She ignored them, pulling the curtains shut and retreating to the kitchen. The pressure mounted when official notices arrived in the mail. A summons to appear in court for disorderly conduct and obstruction of justice. Fines loomed large, and the possibility of community service hung over her head like a dark cloud. Determined to salvage her reputation, Karen initially planned to fight the charges. She drafted emails to local news stations, attempting to justify her actions and paint herself as a misunderstood crusader. But every draft sounded hollow, even to her own ears. Deep down, she knew she couldn't rewrite reality. She had made a mistake, a big one, and pretending otherwise wouldn't fix anything. It was during one of her anger management classes, a requirement imposed by the court, that Karen finally broke down. The instructor led a discussion about accountability and the importance of recognizing one's faults. As Karen listened to others share their stories, She realized how similar they were to hers. Each person had acted impulsively, letting fear or anger dictate their choices, only to regret it later. When it was her turn to speak, Karen hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "But I hurt innocent people instead. I never meant to cause harm. I didn't think." The room fell silent, everyone absorbing her words. The instructor nodded encouragingly. "Acknowledging your mistakes is the first step toward growth," she said softly. "Now, what will you do to make things right?" Inspired by the session, Karen decided to take action. She reached out to the nonprofit organization responsible for the van, apologizing profusely for her behavior and asking if there was any way she could help. To her surprise, they responded warmly, inviting her to visit their facility and learn more about their mission. Hesitant but hopeful, Karen accepted the invitation. During her visit, she met the families who depended on the program and heard firsthand how much it meant to them. She watched as volunteers interacted with the children, playing games, teaching skills, and providing support tailored to their unique needs. It was eye-opening, to say the least. For the first time, Karen saw the humanity behind the situation she had so recklessly disrupted. Over the following weeks, Karen threw herself into volunteering at the center. She helped organize fundraisers, assisted with events, and even offered to drive for the program when extra hands were needed. Slowly, but surely, her efforts began to mend some of the damage she had caused. Parents who had once viewed her with suspicion started to soften, appreciating her willingness to change. While forgiveness didn't come easily, Karen's sincerity eventually earned her a second chance. She learned valuable lessons about patience, empathy, and the dangers of jumping to conclusions. Most importantly, she discovered that true strength lies not in being right, but in having the courage to admit when you're wrong, and doing whatever it takes to make amends. Though the scars of that day would remain, Karen emerged stronger and wiser, determined to use her experience as a catalyst for personal growth. Little did she know, her journey was far from over. But this time, she was ready to face it with humility and grace. Karen's transformation didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, often painful process, one that required her to confront not just the consequences of her actions, but also the deeper reasons behind them. In the weeks and months following the incident, she found herself reflecting on who she was as a person. Had she always been so quick to judge? Was her need to protect the neighborhood rooted in genuine concern? Or was it something else entirely? Perhaps a desire for control, attention, or validation? At first, volunteering at the nonprofit organization felt awkward. Karen wasn't sure how to act around the children or their families. She worried they'd see through her efforts and think she was only there out of obligation. But as time went on, something remarkable happened. She began to connect with the people she had once misunderstood. One particular child, a boy named Ethan, stood out to her. He was 8 years old, with bright blue eyes and a love for drawing. Despite his physical challenges, he used a walker to get around. Ethan radiated joy. During one of the art sessions at the center, he handed Karen a picture he had drawn. It was a simple sketch of a van surrounded by smiling stick figures. At the bottom, in wobbly letters, he had written, "Thank you for helping us." Tears welled up in Karen's eyes as she looked at the drawing. For the first time, she truly understood the impact of her earlier mistake, not just on Marcus and the drivers, but on the children themselves. They weren't pawns in some imagined drama. They were real people with hopes, dreams, and feelings. And while Karen couldn't undo the harm she had caused, she could make sure it never happened again. As word spread about Karen's involvement with the nonprofit, opinions in the community began to shift. Some neighbors remained skeptical, whispering behind closed doors about whether her change of heart was genuine. Others, however, noticed her dedication and willingness to go above and beyond. When the center needed volunteers for a charity run, Karen signed up without hesitation, even though running wasn't exactly her strong suit. By the end of the event, she was drenched in sweat and utterly exhausted. but she wore a wide grin as she crossed the finish line, cheered on by the very family she had once let down. Her husband, Mark, watched her progress with pride. "You've come a long way," he told her one evening as they sat together on the porch. "I'm really proud of you." Karen smiled faintly, though her gaze remained distant. "I still have a long way to go," she admitted. "But I'm trying. That's what matters, right?" Mark nodded. "Yeah, it does. And hey, if anyone can turn things around, it's you." Despite her growing acceptance within the community, Karen knew that rebuilding trust would take time, and not everyone would forgive her. One afternoon, as she was leaving the center, she ran into Derek, the SWAT officer who had intervened. During the confrontation, their encounter was brief but meaningful. "Hey," Derek said, giving her a polite nod. "How's it going?" Karen hesitated, unsure of what to say. Good, I guess. Thanks for asking." Derek studied her for a moment before speaking. "Look, I know what happened back then was tough, for everyone involved. But I want you to know Marcus has nothing but respect for the work you're doing now. You've earned it." His words caught Karen off guard, and for a moment she struggled to respond. "Thank you," she finally managed, her voice cracking slightly. "That means a lot." As Derek walked away, Karen felt a mix of relief and gratitude wash over her. It wasn't an outright absolution, but it was a step forward, a sign that people were willing to give her another chance. The turning point came several months later when the nonprofit held its annual gala to celebrate the program's successes and raise funds for future initiatives. Karen was invited to speak at the event, an honor she hadn't anticipated. As she stood backstage, clutching her notes nervously, she wondered if she was ready for this moment. Would the audience listen to her, or would they dismiss her as insincere? When her name was called, Karen stepped onto the stage, greeted by polite applause. She took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in her chest. "I won't lie to you. I didn't expect to be standing here tonight," she started, glancing out at the sea of faces. "A year ago, I made a terrible mistake. I let fear and suspicion cloud my judgment, and in doing so I hurt innocent people who deserved better from me. I'll carry the weight of that mistake for the rest of my life." She paused, letting her words sink in. The room was silent, every eye fixed on her. "But I also learned something important," she continued. "I learned that growth begins with accountability. I learned that apologies aren't enough unless they're backed by action. And most importantly, I learned that empathy is the key to understanding, not just others, but ourselves." By the time Karen finished her speech, the audience erupted into applause. Tears streamed down her face as she stepped off the stage, overwhelmed by the support she had received. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. In the months that followed, Karen became a vocal advocate for the nonprofit and other organizations supporting individuals with disabilities. She gave talks at local schools, sharing her story and encouraging students to approach life with curiosity rather than judgment. She organized workshops to educate her neighbors about the importance of inclusivity and compassion. And she continued volunteering at the center, finding joy in the smallest moments, like watching Ethan proudly show off his latest artwork, or hearing laughter fill the room during a group activity. Though the scars of her past actions remained, Karen no longer saw them as a source of shame. Instead, she viewed them as reminders of how far she had come, and how much further she still wanted to go. Her journey wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't easy, but it was hers, and she embraced it fully, determined to leave a positive mark on the world. As she stood outside the center one crisp autumn morning watching the familiar white van pull away with its precious cargo, Karen smiled to herself. She had started this chapter of her life as someone blinded by assumptions and ended it as someone committed to seeing the truth. And in that truth, she had found redemption, not just for herself, but for the community she loved.